A huge welcome to BLOXHUB and today's BLOXHUB debate. This is absolutely wonderful to welcome every one of you, also people that are with me physically. We have a series, you know it, we're focusing on designing the irresistible circular society. We focus on how do we ensure a sustainable future? How will our buildings and cities be created and by whom? Which values and materials will characterize the future of today and the society of today and tomorrow? Circular economy and circular built environment are high on the agenda, and we focus on that in this series. We are in our first debate of the series. We have a total of 8 events of science talks and BLOXHUB debates. A huge thank you before I get started to the people behind the scene helping us do what we do today. It's Aalborg, 3XN, Lendager Group, the Royal Danish Academy, Danish Design Centre, Aalborg University, and of course BLOXHUB. With me virtually today, we have Huang, co-founder and CEO of Miniwiz. I have also Nicholas Ransome, project leader from Lendager Group. And I have newly appointed Professor Harpa Birgisdóttir from Aalborg University. And before I introduce these amazing people a little bit further, I have a few practical details. We are live from BLOXHUB, situated in the center of Copenhagen. BLOXHUB was founded in 2018 and as an initiative from Realdania Philanthropy, Copenhagen City, and the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, because we needed a space where we could cross-collaborate in terms of partnerships between companies, organizations, researchers, and practitioners in order for new ideas and solutions to emerge. We're about 700 research institutions, organizations, and companies who share our lives in BLOXHUB, either as residents or members. The thriving community can be seen in new research projects, networks forming, partnerships emerging, and even new product development. We believe the new solutions to sustainable urban development come from consilience and collaborations. And a huge welcome to those of you who are with us physically today. It is such a pleasure that we are now able to welcome people with us after our pandemic lockdowns that we were very tired of, and we're privileged in Denmark at least to be able to host and have physical gatherings again. I can only encourage you with us here today, and those of you with us live streaming, that you pose comments and questions in the chat. I have a brilliant colleague, Rikke, who's your chat hostess today, and she knows how to make sure that the questions that you pose during the streaming event will reach me. Those of you with me physically, you just raise your hand. I will try to greet and meet every one of you here and make sure that we can have your questions posed as well. Now, let me introduce our panelists, because I've really been looking forward to today. Arthur, trained as an engineer, architect from Cornell and Harvard University, recognized by World Economic Forum as the technology pioneer leading in circular economy revolution today, with 4 global invention patents granted, making decentralized upcycling a reality. Formidable. You have completed over 300,000 square meters of circular ESG development projects across 17 major global cities, transforming local trash into modular, upcycled building products with RE developers and consumer brands like Nike, Starbucks, PMI, BAT, I would say, McDonald's in the last 17 years. Financial Times Earth Award in 2010, Wall Street Journal Innovation Award 2012, Bloomberg New York Venture Fellow 2012, Idea Gold Award 2013, National Geographic Emerging Explorer 2016. I don't know what I've done with my life, I'm sorry. Vatican Award, Science, Ecology, Architecture 2019, Obama Foundation Emerging Leader 2019, Ideate Vision Award 2019. Arthur, formidable. And at this point, I think I'll just go home. But no.
Also, at this point, I was super embarrassed that you shouldn't have read that, So I think that was just one of the standard things that our company typically posts out. Sorry about that.
I think it's important that we shout out when we've also made some formidable achievements, because I have had the honor of meeting you before, and I can rest assured that what we have today is a panel of people that are committed, engaged, and more or less on fire. So, and this is of course why that I'm so happy that I have people here with me, so that you can also experience that level of commitment. Because Harpa Birgisdóttir, I may not be able to list exactly the same decade of awards, but
I don't think I have as many.
I don't know, because what I have written, newly appointed professor at Aalborg University, we were together yesterday celebrating your professorship. But one of the things that I can say is rare in this country is that you have been conducting research which we can see directly impacting legislature. And that in itself is extremely formidable. And I know that I speak on behalf on so many of us. Thank you to have that achievement. That is amazing. And you're also one of the researchers that have also worked in the private industry and then re-entered academia. And that means that all of the researchers and students that Harpa meets, and I know that you do that very frequently, they actually also learn in terms of what happens in what we can say in the private industry, what happens in organizations and companies that work on a daily matter trying to make this change. So thank you for being with me. Nicholas Ransome, I actually thought you must have had so many jokes with that surname, but we'll not go into that today.
I've had most of them.
Well, we'll think of some then. But you are also appointed winner of Urban Sustainability when you participated in the Unleash Global Talent Program. So that is your award. And I know that you're also a strategic wizard. You have an educational background as an architect as well. But you know a lot about the physical planning conditions at any scale. This is a nice thing to be able to do. You're also a photographer. That can come in handy. And you have the ability to draft strategic plans, structure and master plans. And you actually know a lot about meta-analysis when it comes to political planning conditions. And to top that, we have screening of buildings for material potentials within upcycling and recycling. And just as Arthur and Harpa have experienced major change and achievements lately in their life, you as part of Lendager Group are on an amazing journey, almost to the moon, I might say. So Arthur, the commonality between Miniwiz and Lendager, as I think we learned the last time we were together, is that driven by the impetus to make that circular transition, you actually produce materials. And what has happened is that Lendager has just within, I think it was announced last Thursday? Tuesday, I told you earlier today, time is relative. I have now just proven my point. But that part of Lendager is now sold so that there is its ability to scale and really grow the materials to a larger audience. So big things are happening in Lendager Group. This is not a debate about the achievement. This is merely to let you know that today we have with us 3 people that are so focusing on sustainability that we're able to ask them the questions that we think needs answering. So pose your questions today, because we have people that can help us. Today's topic: why is it taking so long to implement circular economy in architecture? It's salient, it's relevant, and it is something that we can talk a lot about, and we will. And just to make the point clear in terms of the topics that we'll be addressing is the sense of time. And yesterday I had the honor of attending Harpa's inaugural lecture at Build, where both Harpa and the Icelandic author Irresistible addressed the aspect of time. And part of that, and I think if you haven't been to Iceland, a lot of people have, but when you are in Iceland, the the erratic movement of nature becomes quite close to you. Something that we rarely experience in Denmark unless we're on the west coast of our peninsula. Part of that really volcanic emergence of nature and the impact it does was quite fiercely demonstrated by Andre yesterday when he showed pictures of glaciers and how they have changed. And one of the points was that previously they were seen as static. Like, we have come to live in a time where we know that we are losing aspects of nature as it was previously seen as static parts of our life. So Andre has written a letter to the future, which I thought was quite beautiful. And it is written to which is okay, is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as glacier. And basically what it says in this letter to the future, in the next 200 years, all our mini glaciers are expected to follow the same path as in losing its status as glacier. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, 4:15 p.m. CO2. So when he read it out loud yesterday, everyone actually became quite silent, because all of a sudden it became real that what Arthur, Nicholas, and Harpa actually focus on every day is time is of the essence. So there is a change. And one of the first things that we'll be dealing with is, have we seen that change? Is it easier to work with the sustainability agenda today than it was 10 years ago? Is there an increasing awareness emerging? Is that what you experience? Because when I spoke to Nicholas, he said, well, 10 years ago we were seen as holier than thou and nobody wanted to hear us. Now there is a demand for our knowledge. But does it mean that it is easier? Now, Harpa, I'm referencing to what you actually brought to the table yesterday. So I'm also going to allow you to answer.
Well, in terms of time, I have been working in research again after a break about 10 years, a little bit more. And there we have been working on the development of the LCA tools to calculate the CO2 emissions from buildings and so on. Of course, this was known before, but we have been working on it, in order to bring it from research out to the building sector. So this has been possible for 10 years. And I know, there has been a lot of development. But as we were talking about yesterday, that there is a need for much faster development. So we have spent like 10 years in learning what is sustainability in buildings, what is DGNB. I was also involved in the first project, the Upcycle House. Now I don't really remember the year, maybe it was 2012 or something like that, where we were trying to figure out how can we measure the real, what we gain from upcycling those materials in those buildings. But yes, we are a step further today, but we have just spent too much time in learning, and we are not there yet. So I think that of course we things have changed a lot during the 10 years, but too slow.
Arthur, have you experienced a change? Are people more interested, seeking your advice on how to ensure that circular transition?
Certainly, especially in the last 2 years, especially during the COVID time, I think. And then a lot of a financial instrument came out to have all kinds of sustainability index. This accounting standards secretly creep into many of major companies across the world, from Bloomberg all the way to New York Stock Exchange all the way to Hong Kong Exchange. They're all starting to having these indices, and these indices, I know it doesn't sound like much, but it really hurts the company in another sense. They don't know how much it hurts yet. I think it will hurt more and more, especially when new generation of investors are coming in. One thing is the indexes are, you got to think about it, stock prices. In the last 2 years during pandemic time, all the stock in the world went up tremendously. But just imagine all this trajectory of growth is now there's an index of them, new generation of investors, an impact-based investor, to be able to evaluate whether this company is an impact company or not. And all that started like what Professor Harpa just said, that it started with the LCA analysis. So all of a sudden, your information or your knowledge or your execution knowledge become very valid, and all the stock traded company are interested in how do you do an LCA analysis? How do I make my LCA analysis much better than the company next to me who are on the same industry on the ticker price? Because if you're in the indices and you're the leader within that sustainability index, your evaluation grow. And if you're not, your evaluation goes down. It's like you're having a house. Your stock is a house. All of a sudden, it can go from it appreciate in value or it depreciate in value. I think this is a huge change in the market space.
Yeah.
And money, really.
Yeah.
In Asia, it makes all the difference, right? So if money is the impetus for many of the changes, this is an indirect way to affect money.
We'll get back to that. Nicholas?
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. I think there are two aspects in it for me, that some things have been very intangible. It's like climate change, what is it? But during the last few years, we've been able to see more and more events, really, where it is obvious this is climate change. So it's in your face. It's happening. And then the other part is really what Harpa is working on, is what can we do and how can we measure what we do, which is also part of these ESG things in the stock exchanges and so on, where we're trying to measure it, even though we're maybe not measuring exactly the right things in exactly the right way, but at least we are trying to give it some sort of value so we can say this is better than this. And that's a start.
It's a start. And Harpa, just to follow up on what you're saying, is the pace still too slow?
Yeah, definitely. I think we have been looking at it. You know, we have the need to bring down the global warming emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the construction sector. You know, half it in the next 10 years and so on. So there's a huge work in front of us. But what we have also seen in our, when we are doing those calculations on buildings, that we can see that there is a huge difference between the different buildings. So there is a possibility where each time you build a new building or you design a new building, there is a huge possibility to have much lower impacts than if you just do it as usual. So if it really meets the needs that we need to have, I'm not sure, but there is a huge potential, but it is not going fast enough.
And because yesterday, I'll share this with Arthur and Nicholas and everyone else, that yesterday Harpa actually showed a picture that in the construction phase of a building, there is such a difference from project to project in terms of how much emission is produced. So there is a huge potential in that phase of the building's life cycle, as it were.
For new construction, it was like up to 3 times the difference in the carbon footprint,
Yeah.
what we have calculated in the Danish buildings that we have been working with. And that have not even been like aims for getting as low as possible. But I also know that there are buildings that have higher carbon footprint.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, new construction.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we know that it is better also to preserve the existing constructions and try to keep them instead of demolishing them instead and building new constructions. That is, of course, something to be kept in mind.
And you're nodding, Arthur. So those the figures, that difference in carbon footprint from the construction of new buildings, you were kind of nodding as if that resonated quite well with you.
Yes, 4 times basically. So it's like 25% versus 75%. It's kind of like this. So this is in our LC analysis too. Just building new build with local material by itself, it really saved literally 60% carbon footprint already. Just not import anything, already save money. And save a lot of resources for the environment. So of course, I'm definitely nodding, and many of these really depends on the locality, the way how the quality of a building is being built. But I think for the last 20 years, green building has really, it's a shame. It's a sham. It's really bad. All these LEED certifications, like the worst of the worst, because it actually create much higher carbon footprint building. I'm sure. I hope that. I mean, this is because we did an LC analysis compared to a LEED platinum building, and we just went through its embedded carbon footprint. It's completely crazy. It's nuts. Okay, so I would just like, what is going on? If all the building standards are following that, oh my goodness, I think we should. I mean, we shouldn't exist anyways. So, and then I think if we go back, I want to raise one point, maybe just to be a little bit controversial, so we can have a conversation, not agreeing with each other. Actually, during pandemic, I think it's the best time for the environment. And this is not a controversial statement. It is true. Yeah. All construction stops. We cannot import material. I cannot import material to build our hospital that we're building. So I have to figure out a way, which happens to be something I know already had to do, is to use machineries to turn recycled aluminum into different type of panel system, which is quite easy actually if you look at it. And lots of local manufacturer, and this is a very old technology, just melt your aluminum and you can turn it into anything, right? So it's actually really about, you want to make things fast enough, it's very simple. Just shut down the global economy. And I know that sounds really bad, but I mean, I think there's a way of saving. It's easy. Yeah, it's easy. It's so easy. Let's have another virus. It's easy. Yeah.
So if we also, just to tap into what you're saying, that before that money is also behind the scene a great impetus for change. If we kind of start addressing what are the barriers to the circular transition, because I don't think a lot of people would like us to stay at home for the rest of our lives. I certainly know that here in that you should see the people in Copenhagen, Arthur, the first night that people could go to a bar. I happened accidentally to be in the city center of Copenhagen by accident, and it was I couldn't get through. That never happens in this country, that you can't walk in the street because there were so many people. It was like being at a concert with some popular band I don't know the name of. So it was as if there was a psychological reaction to having been slowed down, as if they were trying to catch up with something elusive, as it were. So just going, what are the barriers to circular transition, given that we can't actually stop, as we have seen being done in the pandemic, Nicholas? We have the rules, we have the legislation.
Well, have we?
Have we? That's my question.
Because I think to follow on what you said, I mean, are we even measuring the right things?
Yeah.
How are our certification schemes sort of working? What is our legislation? All these things around it. I don't think we're there yet. in some ways it is focusing us in the wrong directions, I would say. I mean, Harpa can probably tell us about peak insulation, like we're making thicker and thicker walls, more and more embodied carbon, but soon our energy is going to be quite a lot greener. So this is silly. Things like that.
Would you were nodding when Arthur said the certifications are a sham.
Yes and no. I mean, they're difficult. I mean, they really present you with many dilemmas. I mean, I've worked with the DGNB system, which is, so I would say, quite holistic, but it really shows you that if you want one thing, you can't necessarily get the other. So it's like, are we going to create a super socially sustainable space, or are we going for a really low CO2 per kilogram per square meter building? And then you can really see that you can't always get everything, and that basically we should stop building.
We should stop building new buildings. I hear that a lot these days. We should stop building new buildings. But we also know, I think, Nicholas, you had the case from Lagos that there is not an interest in renovating. They want to build with new materials.
Yes, well, that was, I was working together with a guy from Lagos and working on this idea for using buildings as a material bank and how you could use reality capture and all sorts of things to make a new marketplace for recycled building materials. But he said that's all very good, and I think it's a fine idea, but people in Lagos, they want new materials because there's no status in using rubbish to make your home out of. Whereas in Denmark, it's almost sort of a status symbol that you've got something which looks nice and worn and it's full of stories, stuff like that. So there's also a cultural aspect.
What would your take be on that, Arthur? Is that something that you can also identify from your international experience, the cultural elements?
No, definitely. We still in Asia, still in love with Brazilian marble, you know, or Italian travertine, and you're like, well, how is that related to you culturally? I still don't understand. How is that? I mean, they're still doing that. So I totally agree, and that's that. I mean, I really agree. So, but I think you earlier mentioned in the questions, like, yeah, let's not go so pessimistic. Let's go into a more positive realm. I think this is where I think the debate can go. How this can potentially be a solution for us to address, and we can question that. I know the certification is a sham. It's okay. I also know that money is an impetus to change, but that's okay. It just us engineers and designers just have to be familiar with how these monies are being calculated and operated, and then you can actually understand beyond the cultural understanding is the pure financial incentive, how people wants to work on certain projects. Most of these projects are financial projects. Many of these development projects are financial projects. Yeah. Okay. So we got that out of the way, and then so I recently did a series of presentation with lots of major real estate developers, and all the question that came back to us is that, yeah, I mean, this is a great idea. How can we implement it? And then like. And they don't really care about certification. They just care about like, I want to be the first in the marketplace. I want to show it to the indices that I'm the leader in this space. Okay, that's quite simple. And I think then the next thing they ask is, okay, but you know, every time I ask my architect, I'm talking about famous architect here. Okay, I'm talking about OMA. I'm talking about Stoneheader. I mean, I'm talking about these major firm. I'm asking our architects to help us do LC analysis, embedded carbon footprint, so we can get a huge score on our, you know, ESG certification process, accreditation process. And then all of them, including the engineering firm they approach, very famous one, none of them says they can do this for them, or it's going to cost them so much money, and that's why we don't even have a basic info to implement what needs to be implemented, right? Let's not even talk about certification. What needs to be implemented to have a low carbon footprint building? And the architects just gave like solar panels, some like recycled paper things here and there, and then that's it. But in the majority of it, it's just nothing related to the major savings of a carbon footprint. And so they were very disappointed at the professionals in that respect. Yeah. And I say, as a client, this is again going back to the money issues. As a client, I say, why don't you just demand them to give you this analysis? You don't care how they come about. You just need to show me a winning examples.
Yeah. Okay, Harpa
I mean,
is actually,
I think it's obvious.
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
I want
please.
to respond a little bit on the certification schemes. My first project at the Danish Building Research Institute was to evaluate 4 different schemes that could be used for Denmark. And there were international ones that are used by many, like Elite and BREEAM, but they were also looking into a new one, the GGNB. But what was, and GGNB was then chosen because it had this holistic approach. But what is really important for GGNB is that there was this requirements from the beginning in Denmark from 2011. You had to make a full LCA of your building. Maybe we were not that good at it at that time when we started, but this has become something that has to be done in the projects. So I think, and I have to say, at least for the reason why we can have requirements now in Denmark for legislation is that we have had this history. We have been working slowly on developing this discipline. And then you can question if we have spent too much time in learning how to do it, and if the requirements of the, if the limits values should be even stricter. Because then we have all the instruments there. And then, of course, when you're working with sustainability and you want to have a holistic approach for social, economic, and the environmental aspects, then this CO2 number is only a minor part. Because they're also looking into, 40 other things. But we have all opportunities to highlight this, to have some kind of a special focus on it, to have focus on lowering and so on. So I think, at least I have to say, and I, of course, I've been involved in this process. So but I think that is, it really accelerated the development.
It has made the difference. I just want to say to SAG in the chat, thank you. There is a comment. Arthur is telling the truth regarding green building certifications, mostly green wallpaper for marketing building purposes. So Harpa, you get a chance to comment here. Some truths need exposure in sustainable construction and its delivery. So just to, how can we avoid that we end up believing or have the perception that this is green wallpaper? I like that way of phrasing it. How can we avoid that, Nicholas?
Well, I think many of the clients and the developers haven't quite understood what it actually is to make a more sustainable building. I mean, they are not sustainable yet in an absolute sort of measurement. They are relatively more sustainable. But because what we sometimes find is that they're willing to pay for surfaces that are visible, because
like
that
the solar
has
panels?
well, they're not so sexy, but like some floors and walls, because you can see it and it carries a story and you can go and touch it. But actually, it's just cladding on a concrete building. So actually, they should have put the money in the load-bearing sort of structural system, or not torn the building down that was there already. And then just put something cheap on the walls, basically.
So just to get the, I have because I was going to say, as Arthur, why don't the clients just demand it? So one thing is, one of the barriers that I hear from all of you is that we build new buildings. How can we make that paradigm shift to start basically thinking that it is much better and much more marketable, how much more popular, much more sexy, to use a colloquial term, to renovate? That transition, what would that require? Because that seems to be what you're all saying, that we know this. Don't build new. Going back to what you said, Arthur, the most sustainable period in the last 10 years was when we were at lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the easiest way is actually to, I totally agree with earlier, it's like building as a reservoir of materials. But this is a really hard concept to sell to developers. But if you look at a financial analysis, it is a 25% saving. Just imagine every material, it doesn't matter if it's wallpaper, it doesn't matter if it's concrete walls. If that material still retain 25% of that value, even at end of life, or continue to become part of your balance sheets. This is quite amazing. The investments, right? Divestment, if you call it that. But if you go back down to your questions, it's like, is it a better branding value, or is it you need, like, in all new products or new technology, you need to, what's that? There's a term, it's like coined by some business school theory. It's like everything you go out there has to be half the price of existing solutions out there. Otherwise, it's not considered a replacement solution. So if you can, so right now, most of the solutions, it's about considering the future or considering the branding value, but they do not have a direct half of a price saving immediately that they can feel. Once you have that parities, everybody will change. So what are you talking about retrofitting? If half of a price and half double the cool, then everyone would do it. Yeah, but the problem is retrofitting actually costs more. It's more complex, more consultants. So it become not sexy on the financial sense. So I'm just putting that out there as a reality.
It's a good point. We actually have a question from our audience. So, please.
Yeah, my name is Mikkel. I'm from Secret Architecture, and we're putting together a little group of architects who we want to define a goal for us as businesses for the buildings that we do to kind of speed up the process and move ahead of the legislation with carbon footprint. And I think one of the things that we would need to do is move our clients from new build into transitions or into refurbishments. But one of the things that we could need to do that is more data and more research into what does it mean with the carbon footprint if we do refurbishments instead of new build. And there's very little kind of solid data on that still. And I think Harpa has made a fantastic effort in the build report or the SBE report to document new build footprints that actually creates a fantastic benchmark for an average that we can start from. But if we could have the same kind of data for different kinds of rebuilds, that would be absolutely amazing.
So the comment is praise to Harpa's work in terms of what we have of documentation. But also the question is, and we need that in other types of refurbishment and renovations of buildings.
So if anybody has data, let's share it.
So the comment out also to those of you participating online is to start sharing knowledge and data in order to be able to document that when we renovate and refurbish, to actually document the value in terms of the we have ensured of CO2 emissions reductions or other type of value creation. And we have Harpa, and then we have another comment.
Yeah, I totally agree that we don't know enough about exactly the savings of renovations. So we have a lot of studies that have shown that in many cases, very often, it is a lot of savings there. We also know, as when we renovate, that we can also choose different solutions when we choose our claddings or whatever we are choosing, and then that can have a huge difference. But I totally agree, we need much more knowledge on this, and now we cannot spend like the next 10 years of doing that totally perfectly. But what is, of course, really, really complicated about the existing buildings is that there are many different kinds of them, and there are so many different materials involved. So if we want to calculate and so on, and prove and help, because we want to try to prove, or not only just for proving, because we want to do something better, but how to prove the real savings, and that has to, we need to and we are focusing a lot on it at the moment. But I totally agree that.
But if anybody has some data, let's share it, because we really need benchmarks, because we can't spend time to do LCA calculations on the project. When we do it, it's often too late.
Yeah.
To change those big decisions.
Yeah. And I am not out there in practice in those projects, but people tell me also that this cannot be too complicated, because then it will be too expensive, and then it will, it will be a barrier.
So a shout out to everyone in the room and also participating virtually. Share data, and I know that we actually have initiatives in Denmark where we are beginning to share this data in terms of materials, so that we can be much better at reusing and upcycling these materials. And it's in the making. I just had a meeting with some people earlier today. But please put it in the chat if we have some of you with us live, so that we can disseminate it afterwards. We actually have another 2 comments, and I urge you to speak as loud as possible, so that
I mean, I think there's this duality of like the really technical side of these things, where we actually have to find better ways to measure things and actually do proper LCA analysis. But there's also the argument, which I think is a very good one, about money is also driven by public opinion, and public opinion is driven by what is sexy. So there is definitely some scope for making these things more accessible, literally and figuratively, to the public. The same way, like the word sustainability is very common on these LCAs. We actually worked on a project in CETA where we try to chain machine learning models to sort of make retrofitting of houses accessible to the people. So we try to make an interface on the website where you can just upload an image of your house, and hypothetically, we will give you thermal analyses. This website does that, gives you thermal analyses and CO2 benefits, CO2 reduction benefits, cost benefits, etc. So we need, first of all, I think we can leverage technology to make these things more accessible, so that people can just, what if this was like fashion? Like, what is the new skin your building is wearing? Make it also sexy, and that does not have to easily automatically relate to LCA analysis, which is legitimate yet, right? Because then you need to drive public opinion to be more interested in this.
So what we've just heard, in case you couldn't hear it, Arthur, is the shout out that yes, we have the LCA, which is really important in terms of investors and that part of the game, as it were. But the other aspect is also to drive or push public opinion even more. And that ties into technology, that we have a lot of technological developments at the moment to make our experiences accessible, to make that push for public opinion so it becomes accessible for everyone to see how we can refurbish, renovate, and still achieve an aesthetic result, I would say, the benefits. Then we have a question.
No, a comment.
A comment. So speak as loudly as you can, please.
Of course, thank you, Pernille. So my name is Martin Hedvang. I'm the founder of the company Orca, where we are working on realizing circular landscape architecture. And I just want to raise the point, as you say, maybe we should change the thinking of what and how we are building these sustainable cities and construction. And maybe we also need to look a little broader than just the building. Maybe we also really need to look into how our landscapes are moving. We are quite a heavy design, so to say, moving a lot of things around. And besides that, or added to that, maybe we also need to look at the city level of how we are organizing the things that we are doing. I think it's very important that we also look on a city level of how we are organizing and how both landscape and city, or landscape and buildings could help each other coming to this final goal.
So a very good comment, and I'll just relate to you in an abbreviated version, is to start thinking landscape and buildings at a city level to make sure that there is an interaction and that we can share the learnings, not just from the building, but also from the landscape, and design cities that interact. So, I had a question based on some of the things you said earlier. I just need to say again, thank you to SAG with the following. Has Arthur stirred a hornet's nest? I believe so. So let's get rid of the hornets, opportunistic, financial, not building projects. There we go. Seems as if we're creating a movement here with you guys on board. But I want to tap into something that you've all addressed earlier, and that is the role of architects. A little bit in terms of that the clients may have started realizing that there is a need for change. We have investors that actually want to make the right choices. And then, as you said, Arthur, that you meet people or clients that then say, but this architect couldn't deliver when I asked for solutions. I happen to know, I think I'm taking a wild guess, that there may be students amongst us today. Are we teaching, making sure that the architects of the future, are they learning the right things while they're still at school, as it were? Arthur, you brought it up that we do lack some knowledge in amongst architects.
This is very tough for me to answer because I taught in Cornell also. I love my old school, but I really think the teaching is way behind. I hope Europe is not like that. From some of the architecture students I work with in Italy, I know is way behind. I'm just saying a lot of, first of all, let's say BIM, building integrated, all this new digitalization, visualization software, linking that to all the data and all that stuff. Okay, so I know that we are moving from CAD, which is a 2D to 3D, now to 4D, like a CATIA system. Now you have informations and manufacturing information and all that stuff, trying to embed it into one system where you can calculate that. But if you imagine if you can do that, linking that directly to the LCA analysis, so then everything you draw in module form, everything is instantly calculated. So this really will answer all the questions that we are talking about. Like, I mean, LCA should be a prerequisite of everything you do. And LCA is not just embedded carbon footprint. It also includes water pollutions, eutrophications, also includes air pollutions. And on top of that, there's also interior safety performance in terms of how much VOC you're using this. Are you using that and you are using so many glue on this construction, on this interior wall? You're actually creating lots of potential VOC on the interior spaces, for example. So all that can actually be digitalized already. And we are just one company trying to do that. But I'm also trying to push the school should have much more advanced version of this ready to deploy. And that should be the design tool of the future, no? Unfortunately, I don't see any. Not even MIT. You know what I mean? This is really embarrassing.
All right. So, I'm looking, I assume, I'm hoping some of you are students or not. Yes. Yes, a question, comment, shout it out.
It's more of a question now that we're on the students and fresh graduates topic. So now that I feel like there's a lot of experienced people in the field, what can us fresh graduates do? What is the main role we can take or the most important skill we need to contribute to the green transition or a circular transition?
That's a beautiful question. So the question is, which role and what is the most important skill as a newly graduate in order to embark on and actually participate and contribute to that green transition? Harpa.
I think you should choose all the courses that you can get on LCA and things like that, or also learning how to work with the BIM integration and to be more clever on how to work with this. So I think you should do that. And I think not you should only choose it yourself. I think it has to be, I am not an architect, I'm not working in consultancy anymore either, but I've been there. But it is when I look into the numbers that I'm analyzing, and I can see that you have this peak when you build a building, And it can vary from something in this size to this size. Then I think, okay, you as a designer, you have a huge influence. You have big power. But of course it can also be the client, is then, that also has to realize that the client also has this power to say, demand something. And there are so many possibilities there. So we have to work on that. But I really, and that is, and now maybe I'm getting a wild guess getting here. And then, because we have been talking about time, and they're often saying, but there's not time, because we have so short time in the design process, because we have to do it like this, so we don't have the time to do it. And then I think, but we have totally wrong values on our materials and time, because we then take very, sorry to say, silly decisions quickly, because we don't have the time to look into if we can have this amount of emissions or this amount of emissions, because we're saving, and now I don't know how many days or weeks. So this is something that we really have to question about, what is the price tag on this time for it, and also the materials. Yeah.
Nicholas.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of add to that what I'm trying to do as sort of project director is to make sure that we actually reverse our design processes a bit and try and sort of scope out what are the possibilities to begin with regarding, for example, embedded carbon, so that we, in the early design phase, actually make some intelligent decisions. And it is difficult. I can see that it takes time for people to get that embedded in their way of thinking, because it's not form, it's concept at sort of a higher level. And then there's another thing that I also think is important regarding what Arthur said, is that I've found out that our job as architects is not just about communicating the architecture, that it is functional and beautiful. It's also got to be sustainable, and you've got to understand the business models in the sort of real estate industry and understand how you can make them realize that if you do it in this way, you have a product of a higher value. For example, if you can take it apart again. But how does that fit into their spreadsheets? It doesn't always, because they haven't got that column in there yet.
That's going back to what Arthur said. We need to document. We need to be able to document there is half the price. There is a specific earning here and now, not just in the future. We actually have a question a question?
Well, it's more of a comment, or maybe a sort of a little broader perspective of this discussion of architecture and the role of architects, and just, well, for one, saying that about 40% of all architects ends up as a client. So maybe just about understanding what it takes to be a client, and what you need to know about buying and demanding and so on as an architect, and then also understanding that a building is not only made by clients and architects. There's so many other actors and competences needed in order to have a sustainable, maybe this sustainable more building in the end. And it's all about the end product, because that is what makes the CO2 emissions. It's not all the thoughts, all the drawings, all the models that make the CO2 or the carbon footprint. It's actually the building. So think all the way to the end product and all the actors needed in that process.
So I hear you say two things. The first thing is actually really, really important, that architects end up not just as architects, but also as the client. And we see that in cities, etc. So I think that is a really, really salient point. So they need to know to develop the vocabulary to make the demands as a client. Yeah. The other point is, as we know, the building sector has an amazing complex value chain. And if we want to achieve and secure the green transition, the circular transition, we need also to incorporate or find a way so that every actor performing a role in the value chain, that person, that company knows what to do. We have from Henning Larsen Architects the proposition, and also in terms going back to Nicholas with the business model, advocating that we need to change the business model. So where the architect can deliver the model, the drawing, and make a lot of money on that, rather have it as a performance-based business model. So where the designer is part of the building's life cycle, as it were, because the revenue stream should also come based on performance. The classic example that Henning Larsen usually uses in this is the transition and the construction of Moskov Museum, because it has been such a huge success, where they're saying if we had now changed our business model at that point, it would have been a very, very good business case. But the nuance to that is also that means that the architect has basically part of the vested interest in making this a success. There is a risk. It's much more risky business as an architect. So that's why I think there's something quite interesting in that thought from Henning Larsen. You're nodding, Arthur.
Yes, real architect should be its own developer. And they should co-invest with the developer. And they have to have skin in the game. I think this is what Nicholas is doing. I think that's why if you have skin in the game, you constantly modify. So many of the things that we say or we do actually become part of your competitive advantage as a group. But also, it also is becoming this purely business consideration actually become a second nature for environmental consideration. I mean, that's ideal, right? We are still baby stage, far from it. But I think in the ideal world, you can create something beautiful, but at the same time, because you worry that it will break some of the promises or the regulatory. This is where regulations comes in. I really think this is not something private sector will have the energy to move on themselves. Just imagine today in Denmark, all the building has a cap on how much carbon you can spend, and all the material has to be made in Denmark, for example, no import. And just imagine all the energy produced, those material has to be X% green energy. You don't show me, you don't get a building permit. You know, that is become a prerequisite, and that is, you know, that will make the whole industry change literally in one day. I know, like, that sounds, and then literally the developer has to co-partner and invest with their engineer and architects and designer. They have to become partners because they're going to force the designers, whatever they put on paper, it has to fulfill these requirements and has to have this impact. And in 20 years, 20% of that building has to be taken out and sold, you know, so you cannot just take it away. So right away, by default, this will change the industry very quickly.
That was one concrete suggestion in terms of how to transition. We have 3 questions or comments, so we'll start.
It's back to the role of the architect and how we can get more impact on this. And I agree that we need to get in earlier and advise strategically much earlier in the process. I had a meeting this morning with one of the huge investors in Denmark, and they are extremely interested in lowering their carbon footprint. They want to do it. They want to do it right now. And they ask, what should we do to do that? And then at the same time, they say, we just acquired this site out here. There's a kind of 20,000 square meter old town hall. We're going to demolish that and build a whole new city. And like, hey, what about starting not demolishing that building and use all that concrete on site? And that's actually a pretty good idea. And it's just that dialogue doesn't take place right now. And if we could get in a lot more and can have that discussion very early in the investment process, then we can have a huge impact much easier than waiting for the technological progress to happen.
So basically there is a similar experience in Denmark that the investors are beginning to ask for these solutions. Yes. And then we have a comment here.
Yes, a question about how does collaboration and knowledge sharing, which we've discussed now, that there's maybe a lack of sharing LCA reports or cross-collaboration with that. How does that play a part in how you see architecture? The context is based on the conversation that we've shared today, but also on a friend's thesis who wrote about a Danish company, an architecture company that I can't remember, assessing how can they incorporate more circular construction and architecture. And a lot of it was on relationships, both on the positive aspect, but also on the challenges of relationships. So I would love to hear your thoughts on collaborating to increase circularity.
I think that is it's a really, really good question. And just to make sure that you also heard it, Arthur, basically going back to the knowledge sharing and data sharing, tying that aspect to the role of architecture or the role of architects, how can we, what are your thoughts on collaborating partnerships to make sure that we have the knowledge and experience that we need in order to transition circularly with the new buildings or the renovations that we conduct? Nicholas?
Yes, when we started developing our own recycled building materials some years ago, then we did so because no one else wanted to. They thought we were crazy. But we slowly found out that there were some collaborators out there and that we didn't actually need to build our own sort of window factory. There was a window factory somewhere where we could collaborate, and they then took our crazy ideas and thought, hey, this will maybe work. And then they were sort of our enablers to make it happen. And I can see that all the time, that what creates extra value and more sustainability and makes things a bit more complicated compared to these sort of normal streamlined processes is sort of collaboration with people who don't agree with you or have something which is complementary to what you know. So that's very much central to this.
So would your advice be either to seek them out, or at least if they approach you, then actually not to close your door but invite them in?
Except that you don't have to know anything, but not anything, everything, sorry. Slight difference.
Yeah, Harpa?
Maybe to share something on this, on sharing data or knowledge. I think actually we have been involved, or we are involved in a European project at the moment where we're trying to, or we are working on establishing benchmark for different countries. And what we found out is that we in Denmark had quite a good access to data compared to many other countries. So, and of course we want much more data than we have, but we had access to that. So I think that is good for the new constructions and so on. But we need much more than this. But compared to starting up with 4 other countries, we were pretty good. But what I think we need right now, just in terms of the LCA and sharing data, we need much, we need to share this data. So because we need to transform quite quickly. So it's really important that people can share data. And I know that I am actually often very surprised when I'm cooperating with different people from the industry that in Denmark, that they actually want to share their data. So for example, building up like this, building elements, libraries, with data on it. If you can share that, then you can help the other ones in, when you're in early design stages and things like that. There are a lot of opportunities to share more data in order to build up this competences.
Do we have a shared language when we share data, Arthur? Which now we've talked about earlier on, we talked about certifications. And we have different certification schemes, but I think that we all grasp the aspect of certification. But what I also hear from what the comments and the questions, do we have a shared language when it comes to data sharing, life cycle analysis, the circular aspect of construction and repurposing, renovating?
Okay, I think I can be very direct on this, so hopefully you guys don't find it too direct. It's actually you want to do LC analysis. It's based on size of a material and weight of a material and how the material is produced. And if you consider that in our current design field, the way how drawings are being made, this is a huge missing gap of information sharing. Okay, so if you want to transition that, first of all, I think this guy has to be really good at like visualizing in 3D in his head, whoever has to do it, right? So because How do you know this? How, if you count the linear meter of a wall and you have to calculate the weight of the material and the process being done, this is quite crazy. This is quite, and how much packing is done into the truck and how it's being transported. So did you see the scale differences in this understanding? Is architects understanding in square meters, and then the material producers understanding in tonnage, in energy outputs. So this is completely not. So first of all, if you want to share LCA data, or I can give you a quick what we modularize it. I can actually calculate a typical commercial space with 4-meter tall wall. What is a 1 linear foot of one of my system cost in LCA? What will it look like in LCA? I can give you a summary page on that. I can share with you on that with all our clients. I always share with them what is the LCA implication of this compared to that. And I also have a LCA of a typical drywall of the exact same dimensions, right? But I think when you want to make this information more prevalent, even I give you the information, it's almost impossible for someone to actually translate it back into an AutoCAD drawings or even so I think it's the way how, okay, so in short, this is last part. Architect needs to learn CATIA or SolidWorks somehow, okay? They need to be able to understand how material are produced. Actually, they don't. They really do not. And I think Nicholas will agree with me on that. After I think I'm just putting that on your in your mouth, but really, architects don't know how things are produced, and that is a huge difference. One is about weight, one is about surface, and that is just by default a mismatch of information.
So in short, no, we don't have the same language.
We don't.
Exactly. Nicholas, you were taking Arthur Basley assumed. Do you agree?
I do completely agree,
Yeah.
and I would say we've actually almost stopped doing things in 2D. Basically, I mean, I learned to draw things in 2D, and now I'm useless. So luckily, some other people can do the work now. But we can really see that having it in 3D and actually thinking about volume or how much does your building weigh. Things like that, and actually being able to understand the sort of envelope to floor space ratio, which looks like everything should be a dome probably, but things like that you actually take that into account when you're designing is really important, and I see we're slowly getting better at it.
Good. We actually have a question, and I haven't forgotten you.
I think you mentioned two very important things. One was the future or the education of future designers and architects. Another one was the common language.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking it's maybe it's not just the education of future designers and architects. It's also re-educating the people who are already in the field. I did a study last year on interior designers, and they are all so excited about circular economy. They want to do it, but they have no idea of where to start.
So and Harpa wants to comment, just to tie you in the loop, Arthur. The comment is, yes, the role of education is so important. Common language, exquisitely important as well. But let's not forget the competency development of the people that are already out there working, from the famous architects that don't know how to do the circular transition to any person every day already working, not being able to help us. And Harpa immediately kind of, and yes, Nicholas and Harpa, I'll let you comment.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Yesterday also, I had I was presenting my vision for education on one slide very quickly. And for all new engineers and architects that should be educated from now on, they should all have some knowledge about materials and climate impacts and LCA. That is our responsibility. They said knew a little bit about it, and then, a big part of them, but not all, should have a deep knowledge. But I have not made analysis of this, but I just can hear around me, everybody is trying to get people now hired in their companies that has knowledge of this. So I don't think that we can in the near future. So I haven't made analysis of it. It's just my feeling from talking to people out there that we cannot solve this by newly educated. And I am involved a lot in this continuous education, but where we have like accepted that you go to a 1-day course on like 8 hours, and you expect to have learned it by the end of the afternoon. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 days. You know, if you're lucky, you have 3 days or something. But we have, this is really that important. We need to have, you know, we have to have the industry to like recognize that, well, we need to educate the people that are already out there working, and it is not solved by 1 or 2 days courses.
It's not a quick fix, I'm hearing.
No.
Nicholas.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. And I mean, we've got thoughts about how we can actually sort of educate our employees further so that they just implement these things naturally. But another thing is the sort of education of the clients. And what we try to do now is put sort of some phases in before the normal phases, where we actually try to find out, what do you know about sustainability? What are your goals in your organization? And how can we actually make those happen? And is there something that you don't know enough about? How can we help you with that? So that we don't just sort of force it down their throat, but it's actually a journey that they're on together with us, and then we can lift them up where they need some help. Because otherwise it's going to be a fight along the way.
So that's basically also your point in entering that collaboration, participating, and going back to you, Harpa, saying let the design phase maybe just take that little bit longer, because what is the rush given the relative aspect of time that we're building something that in this part of the world actually has an average lifespan span of over a century.
When you talked about the existing buildings that they had and they hadn't considered it, I thought about my plastic bag that I was trying to get, and you know, we couldn't find any plastic bag in here, and that is good, isn't it? Yeah. But I forgot to take also a plastic bag. What I wanted to talk about was that I just have this clear memory of seeing an old woman sitting on a bench, and she was like folding very neatly a plastic bag with very curious. I thought this has a value for her. You know, I just remember, I don't know if I was going by bike, and this is it's really valuable for her, and it was really like, and putting it back. And I thought, we are just
the veneration for
material. We are just going so fast, and this doesn't have a value.
Yes.
And that is the same thing. We have to quickly find something new, and X thousand tons of concrete doesn't have a value.
Exactly. I have to say thank you because the thing is, when I encourage you to ask questions and then you actually do, I want to recognize and really make sure that we have comments from, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Agavan. I agree with the point about education. There are many new BIM models added to the program in EU universities. However, much more programming skills are needed. I agree, myself included. What is missing to the curriculums of architects and civil engineers is part of this. So I think they would agree with what you have said. So AEC graduates may have many ideas, but not the necessary skills to pull them off. Very good point. This is why many digital construction companies are now working with computer science graduates instead of AEC graduates. But also a question from Alvaro, thank you very much. What about nature-based materials like bamboo, wood, already produced in Spain or Portugal with great carbon absorption properties to accelerate our path towards circular economy? I don't know if you have, Nicholas, Arthur, any just here at the very end, because we also have another question from our audience. But in terms of natural-based materials and natural-based solutions, what would your take be on that? Arthur, and then we'll go to Nicholas.
I mean, I love it. I mean, I try to, I don't know if you see this space here. These are all made from linen. from fabric waste, like linen fabric, and just turn to architectural material. Linen is, for example, wood, linen. There are many natural material that is actually wondrous material, except most of the time they just have a tendency to go bad in terms of bacteria, in terms of termites, in terms of fire safeties, all that stuff. So if we can resolve most of those issues in the most sustainable way, so for example, for how we combat mildews, and naturally for linen products, there's actually naturally antibacterial. However, it's moisture absorption is quite high for building materials, so it tend to come off from the wall. Yeah. So how do you come up with a way to fasten that onto a wall, for example? So that is, that is definitely the coolest thing that you can do. Of course, you want to use that as much as possible. And a lot of single material buildings now. Recently, I was in the award panels in UK, and then almost all the entries that I like and I see is a huge amount of advancement in technology are actually all single-use natural-based material. However, you just want to make sure that we understand, if you want to talk about carbon footprint, it's not really just a sequestering the carbon is the most important. Every time you transport this material, let's say I take this wood from Spain, okay, and I'm deforesting certain area of Spain, which is lacking certain trees already, and that is really damaging to the environment. And then on top of that, you add chemical to ship to, let's say, Taiwan or Japan. Okay, that is horrible, right? That is still not good. I'm just to get to that. No matter how cool a natural material is, it still should not be used this way.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Yeah, I completely agree on that, and I think there are really, for us, there are two sort of paths. There's the recycling and upcycling, repurposing of existing material, which is already there, and it's just being downcycled. And then there's the bio-based materials, which I think has a huge potential to be sort of rediscovered, both the traditional methods and also these new hybrid materials out of waste materials from agricultural production and so on. And regarding the bio-based materials, they often burn really well, which is bad in a building. So we've actually found out, like with many of our projects, that it's not really the architecture itself that is the problem. It's having a fire safety expert really make a detailed plan for how does this building not burn, or if it does burn, what happens? Because otherwise we can't build with it.
Going back to the collaboration and the value chain.
Yeah.
One last question.
Comment-ish. I kind of goes back to what Nicholas actually said on how we educate our clients, because we were having a really interesting and great conversation with an investor, a real estate investor, the other day. And halfway through, we were talking about circularity, and he's like, but we work with sustainability. Does circularity have anything to do with that? And then it's when we realised this is what we're meeting out there. We are in our own bubble, and we kind of consider it that everyone knows this, but they don't. And they are the one who putting in the money into it, and they're driven by usually someone else's money. And how do we kind of make this work with everything, and that we don't forget that we're in a bubble?
So the bubble of circularity meeting the reality of sustainability, to condense it. How do we make sure that when we meet people that have accepted the sustainability agenda, and then we bring the circular vocabulary with us, then we are even further estranged again?
I will have to say, sustainability is defined by you're looking at environment, society, and economy, holistic approach. And then, of course, the circularity can touch upon some of those. And maybe a lot of it is in the environmental part of it. But, of course, it also influences economy and the social part, because, there can be labor and stuff like that involved. But when we are looking into sustainability, certification of a building, then I don't know. But a lot of it is in the environmental part, but it can also, I think, for example, DGNB has mapped this a bit. But then I also want to say that circularity, and then I can come to the PhD project of Leonora, who has mapped a bit what you can see in in the literature what is defined as circularity or circular solutions. But that is, for me, I'm can say, but some of it is also not just, but what we have also called as eco-design, not all of it. So of course there are some kind of a mix of definitions.
And just to say, for those of you who are going, so Leonora, who is that? We mentioned, and Harpa actually had Leonora Eberhardt's taxonomy presented in our science talks, and that is available on our YouTube channel. So please, and we have listed the various chapters, so it should be hopefully easily accessible. Just to say, we're trying to share as much knowledge and disseminate what we are discussing here. Listen, I hope I fulfilled my promise that you would meet these wonderful people who had so much to offer, because it's now approaching the time where I'm supposed to say thank you. But thank you is not enough for me to express my gratitude to what you have shared with us today. I have to say this has been a really amazing journey into the barriers, the language, the advice and experiences of trying to transition not only architecture, but also how we perceive our world. Going back to time, we are living in the midst of time. That is the beauty of time, but we're also living in the midst of what a lot of people more elegant and articulate than myself will say is the transition. We are in the paradigm shift. We may not ourselves fathom what we are currently going through. And that also means that we're developing a language, a commonality of understanding as we embark in that transition, that paradigm shift. I hope what we have introduced to you today in the debate is the endeavor to do it together, the endeavor not to be paralyzed by the enormous task that we're facing, because we are literally running out of time. I think Arthur, when you have been, your sense, your drive, the commitment to make this change is also because you grasp that severity of time and the deadline that we're facing a while ago, and you have been part of that change. I know it has driven Nicholas, because I spoke to Nicholas last week, and I know it has driven Harpa. And some of the things, sometimes people tell you to be patient, right? Things take time. Maybe the design phase should take a little bit longer time. But your quest and what you have brought you here today to learn from you wonderful people, don't become too patient in pushing for that need of change, because we all need to do it. And I think you started a movement today when you have all in unison, the three of you have said, we need to act today, tomorrow, the day after, and we will share data. We will become better at compiling data. But more importantly, we will become much better at understanding the decision-making processes that drive the change. Arthur, I hope to see you again, because it has been such a pleasure. Thank you.
We're still in lockdown, by the way.
I know, but I didn't want to really. Sorry, we're so happy we're not.
No, congratulations, really. Like, this is
I'm
great.
just saying, sorry,
we have
I know.
we have one COVID case a day. Okay, so we are very exaggerated here in Asia.
Yes.
They have a zero COVID policy.
Yeah. It suits our Danish self-perception that we are not in lockdown. We're actually, and I think I speak for everyone in the room, we're extremely grateful that we're able to move around again. It makes such a big difference for our well-being. Nicholas, it was just as amazing as I knew it would be. Harpa, you are the star on my sky, I can say. I think it's such a real, true inspiration to meet a researcher that will come in a venue like this and just share and push and remind us that learning and being knowledgeable, that is still key, combined with that drive to act and push for change. I suggest we give these wonderful people a huge round of applause. To those of you participating. Thank you. Thank you so very, very much. Have a great evening, and thank you to everyone with us today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.